Welcome to the Reinvention Code. I'm your host, Dorinda Walker. Reinvention isn't random, it has a code. On this podcast, we'll explore what it really takes to navigate life's transitions with introspection, faith, and strategy. If you're evolving, rebuilding, or stepping into a new season, you're not just starting over, you're leveling up. Let's decode your next chapter together.
Hey, beautiful people. I'm back, and today I'm going to talk about what love has taught me about leadership. So, you know how you have a photo app, like I have on my iPad, the photo app always reveals a picture that took place in the past on the same day. So that happened to me today. A picture of me and my late husband popped up, and we were at an event with this famous comedian, and we looked so happy. And I remember that day vividly because we had a lot of fun. And it got me to thinking about my late husband and how his love helped me to become a good leader. So I thought I'd talk about it today because what if the biggest lesson you've ever learned about leadership didn't come from work at all, right? What if it came from who you loved or who you lost? Because I've been sitting with this, thinking about it. And, I read a lot of psychology books because I'm a psychology geek. And the way we love, the way we protect ourselves, the things that we tolerate, it just doesn't show up in relationships, right? It shows up in how we lead, how we make decisions, and how we move through life. And I'm going to have to be honest with you. I didn't always trust love. Not one bit, not at all. By the time my husband came into my life, I was a hot mess. I wasn't just guarded, I was carrying a lot of baggage. And I think it's important to be real about that because people see that 33 years we were together and think it was all bliss. And a lot of it was. But if I'm honest, I have to tell you all of it because I've been through some things. And sometimes when we say that, people don't really understand what that means. And before I met my husband, I had survived 2 suicide attempts. I experienced mental and physical abuse at the hands of my mother's boyfriend. I survived 2 attempted rapes. And I lost my father at the age of 17. So by the time I met Thomas Walker, I didn't see love as something safe. And when I tell you I drove him crazy because I just was not open to it, I saw it as something that you have to survive. So I learned how to protect myself, right? How to read people, how to stay in control. So for a long time, control felt like safety. So when Thomas came into my life talking about love, I was not impressed. I wasn't moved, and I was watching him and side-eyeing him, right? Because I just did not trust it. So the first time we were really alone was at a family barbecue. Thomas's sister and I had become really good friends. At some point during the day, he asked me, "Do you want to go for a walk?" And I really didn't want to say yes. I remember that because he had already made it clear what his intentions for me were. He wanted me to be his girlfriend. And in the back of my mind, I was still questioning his intentions. So my guard was up. I was refusing to let him in. I wasn't trying to listen to anything he was saying. But I was also curious about how he was going to run this game on me. So I went for the walk. And it wasn't anything dramatic. We was just talking and getting to know each other. And then out of nowhere, he said, "I love you." And I still remember how my heart felt because it instantly put up a shield. I was like, because we are not doing this today. Like, I'm not falling for the okie doke. And I looked at him and I said, "Don't confuse lust with love. You don't love me. You want to have sex with me." And I meant what I said. Like, I was strong with my conviction because that was my experience, right? And that's what love, so-called love, had taught me, that men didn't love me. They wanted access to me for sure. And he looked at me. I'll never forget. He was so calm. He had this little grin on his face. And he said, Dorinda, I want you to let me love you. I can have sex with anyone. And I didn't believe him. So I kept my distance. I kept denying. And he let me, he let me have my space. And he had the patience of a saint. He called me every night. And if I'm honest, I wasn't really rejecting him. I was protecting myself. But he was persistent. And what I realize now is that I was running from the possibility of being hurt again. Because before him, the pattern was clear. I attracted men who wanted to control me, manipulate me, use me, and discard me. That's what I was attracting in my life. I was looking for love in all the wrong places. So at some point I had shifted, not consciously, but looking back, I know it became a pattern, right? If I'm going to be used, then I'm going to be the one in control. So instead of seeing my body as something sacred, I used it as a weapon, right? As leverage, as protection. So let me ask you something. Have you ever had a friend or someone in your life or your circle and you've looked at them and said, she's doing way too much, right? And if we're honest, sometimes we judge them, right? And that's a natural reaction, right? We're human, so we do judge. But if that's really your friend, at some point, I think the question shifts from judgment to curiosity. What's driving that behavior? Because for a lot of women, it's not just about sex. It can be about validation, control, or just wanting to feel chosen, even if it's temporary. And I say that with no judgment because I've lived it. Judgment is something I wrote about in my book, Protected by Purpose. Because what I learned is that judgment often says more about the person judging than the person trying to heal. And I learned that in a very real way as a mother. My daughter had got pregnant right out of high school, and she didn't tell me for 6 months. And when I found out, what hit me the hardest was the realization that she was afraid of my judgment. And that made me pause because somewhere along the way, I created an environment where she didn't feel safe coming to me. And that hurt. So I had to shift, not just as a parent, but in how I showed up in relationships, right? I didn't want to come across as someone who was so judgmental that the people I loved couldn't share their thoughts, their worries, their problems with me. I didn't want to be that type of friend. And when I started doing the work, I didn't just look at women differently. I started looking at men differently too. Because this isn't just what I've experienced by no means. This is what psychologists are talking about right now. There's research showing that men are experiencing deep levels of loneliness. And when I reflect on my own experiences, that gives context to a lot of what I've seen. I've dealt with men who didn't communicate clearly, who led with physical connection, who didn't always express what they were feeling. And before, I took that personally. But now I understand from many men, that's not rejection. That's limitation. They weren't taught emotional language. They weren't taught to be vulnerable. So everything comes out through behavior instead of communication. And with women, we tend to lead with emotional connection, right? We want to feel safe, seen, and understood. And neither way is wrong, right? But without understanding, we can misread each other's intentions. So what looks like disinterest might actually be a lack of language. So I want to ground this for a moment. Let's talk about facts versus beliefs. So a common belief is all men cheat. And that's not a fact, right? Women cheat too, but not all women cheat either. And I'll be honest, as someone who spends time on TikTok, one of my biggest frustrations is how quickly these creators generalize. It becomes this us versus them conversation. And as someone who's experienced a committed and healthy love, that mindset is hard to watch. It makes me feel bad for people who've never experienced the type of love that I had for 33 years. And it makes people afraid to trust. And labeling all men or all women the same, it doesn't help us, because what I've seen is you keep picking the same type of man or the same type of woman expecting a different results. And you need to do the inner work. And so what psychologists have found is that people who cheat often share certain patterns. Things like a strong need for validation, right? A sense of entitlement, poor impulse control, and the ability to rationalize their behavior, especially when they know it isn't aligned. So instead of putting everyone into a category or a bucket, I've learned to pay attention to behavior, right? To take the time to get to know and understand people, because people are going to show you who they are, right? So I don't approach people with generalizations, right? I treat them as an individual, because patterns will always tell you more than promises. And when you focus on behavior, you don't have to guess. You don't have to assume. You observe and you decide from there. Here's another belief we hear all the time, and it gets on my nerves. Women are too emotional. But I've come to see it differently. We've all experienced this in relationships, right? Where a man might try to reconnect physically, right? Because that's how he communicates. While a woman wants to talk it through emotionally. And it's not that one is right and one is wrong. It's that they're speaking different languages, because men are emotional too. But many haven't been taught how to process or express those feelings and those emotions. So it shows up differently. So for all my single friends out there, I don't think we're failing each other. I think we're misunderstanding each other in some cases. And without that understanding, we can end up missing each other completely. You know, Thomas pursued me for a year, and at first it scared me because it felt like control, but I learned the difference. Control restricts, right? Persistence is steady. And I was watching, right? Because trust was and is a big issue for me. But over time, he gave me something I had never really experienced, and that was safety. In 33 years, I never wondered where he was. Not once did a woman ever disrupt my home. He made it clear that I was his priority. And for someone who came from instability, that changed everything. Now, he wasn't perfect by any means. He was proud, a little too possessive, and sometimes a little bit insecure, especially in the beginning of our relationship. But let me tell you what I knew about Thomas Walker. That man did not play about me. He didn't just say he loved me. He created an environment where I felt safe being loved. He became my peace, and peace is the rarest form of love. And that was an important insight for me. Because I don't know if you can tell, but I'm very aware that my emotions can range from indifference to that little girl that's full of rage because she still lives inside of me. And that's exactly why I protect my peace, because the rage didn't really disappear. I just learned not to feed it. It's why I keep my circle small and why I choose to be around people who see life in a positive way. Because I know myself, I can go from 0 to 100. And me at 100 is not who I want to be, and it's definitely not who you want to see. When these hazel eyes start turning green and turning colors, as my kids and husband used to tell me, that means you better watch out. So peace for me isn't passive. It's really discipline. And that discipline changed how I lead, because leadership will expose you. So stay with me here. I'm going to transition into corporate. You know, when you're in corporate America, you get a lot of training. Some of it's helpful. Some of it you forget as soon as you leave the room. But every now and then you come across something that actually stays with you, right? Something that changes how you see people and how you see yourself. And for me, that was a DISC assessment. I did a DISC training with this brilliant trainer named Rodney Brown. I'll never forget him. It's a behavioral assessment. And what it does is help you understand how people naturally show up, how they communicate, how they make decisions, how they respond under pressure. It breaks people down into 4 general styles. So D is for dominance, I is for influence, S is for steadiness, and C is for conscientiousness. And when I first took it, I didn't realize how much it was about to shift how I lead, because I had an experience that stuck with me. I remember working on a big project, and the VP leading the project would show up late to meetings. And just not late, he would come in and start shooting the breeze about his weekend, the Al Jarreau concert, his dating life. And I'd be sitting there like, is he serious? I'm ready to talk about this project. I'm sitting here thinking, I don't care. Can we get to the work? Because I'm trying to get clarity and I need to move this thing forward and meet the deadline. And it became obvious that I was annoyed because I don't have a poker face. And he said to me, Dorinda, if you want to move up the ranks, you're going to have to take the time to get to know people. And I remember thinking, what does that have to do with me getting this work done? And then he said something that stayed with me. And it was in that moment that I knew I had to shift. He said, Dorinda, I can schedule an hour meeting with you. And if it were up to you, we'd be finished in 5 minutes, because all you want to know is what needs to get done by when, how we're going to do it, and you're done. You're off and making things happen. But if you don't change how you interact with people, you'll always be seen as a workhorse and never a leader. And that was the aha moment. And that stayed with me because I didn't fully understand how to adapt until I took the DISC assessment and the training. And when I got my results, it clicked. That VP was an I, right? So he liked to influence, which means he connects through conversation, through energy, through relationships. So what I saw as wasting time, he saw it as building connection. And if I wanted to be effective with him, I had to adjust, not change, right? Because you can't change who you are, but shift how I showed up in my interactions with him. Then I had a direct report, right? A woman who reported to me who was an S. So she was steady, consistent. She valued stability. And when I tell you I drove that woman crazy, I could tell she wanted to strangle me. And it was because I was moving fast, multitasking, shifting priorities. And for me, that felt productive. But to her, it felt chaotic, right? She's like, what is happening? You are just crazy. And once I understood that, I adjusted again, right? So that's what this taught me, not to treat people the same, but to lead every engagement differently based on, their D, I, S, or C. And so now, whenever I meet someone within 5 minutes, I can pretty much figure out where they fit on that spectrum and how I have to adjust in order to be productive in that engagement. Because being fair doesn't mean being identical, right? Leadership is meeting people where they are. And then life introduced me to grief. And I learned lessons there too. I learned that sometimes people try to replace what they lost. I had 2 uncles who lost their wives of over 20 or 30 years, and they remarried quickly within like 2 years, and they both regretted it. Because you can replace presence, but you can't replace significance, right? So after my husband died, I knew I had to give myself time. Because believe it or not, when my husband died, that's when I was getting the most calls from men. But I knew that my husband could not be replaced. So I had to give myself time. And last summer, I tried dating apps. What I didn't like about them was the feeling that you're being interviewed. It's like a checklist, a series of questions. What do you do? What are you looking for? What do you bring to the table? And I'm sitting there like, we haven't even sat at a table. Like, what are you talking about? So, needless to say, I never even made it to a date from a dating app. What I did find that they're good for weeding out non-contenders because I got a bunch of non-contenders that I match with. But I stopped using them because I don't want relationships that feel transactional. And that's what the dating apps feel like to me. I just want something simple, right? I meet a guy, he says, hey, what's up? Can I take you out? We spend time together. Let's talk. Let's get to know each other naturally because it really shouldn't be that hard. Like, I'm convinced it should not be that hard. And if I'm honest, I think social media has changed how we communicate and not in a good way. Everything feels curated. Everything feels performative. Everything feels like people are trying to position themselves instead of just being present. And that's hard to build something real from. But I haven't given up, right? Because I prayed about it and I believe that God will send the right person at the right time. And I've learned this too. You can't pray for something and then operate in doubt. If you're a believer, you have to trust. You have to be patient. And I know I can experience love again. But I also understand if I'm going to be open to love, I have to be ready to love. Not from loneliness, not from comparison, not from a void, but from wholeness. And that's why I gave myself time. It's been almost 4 years. And I've sat with my grief and I'm ready to come to the other side of it, right? I'll never forget what I had with Thomas. But he told me before he died that he wanted me to find love again. He didn't want me to be alone. And I know that I don't have to be. It's been almost 4 years that I've sat with my grief. I've had time to process it, time to come to terms with it, with who I am now, because I don't want someone that has to compete with my past. Because I wouldn't want that for myself. I want to meet someone from my healed present. So before I close, I want you to sit with this. Are you loving from a healed place or a protective place? Because how you answer that question doesn't just show up in your relationships. It shows up in how you lead and how you communicate and how you respond under pressure and how you build trust or how you break it. Because unhealed patterns don't just affect who you love, they shape how you show up everywhere. And let me say this because this applies whether you're single or married. If you're single, this is about how you prepare, right? How you ensure that you're coming from a healed place, how you understand your own patterns, how you choose differently. And if you're in a relationship or you're married, this is about how you show up, how you communicate, how you handle conflict, how you build trust consistently. Because relationships don't just grow by default, they grow through work and intention. Here's the reinvention code for this episode. Grief isn't something you skip, it's something you move through. Love isn't something you replace, it's something you experience and evolve from. Leadership isn't control, it's awareness. Awareness of your patterns, your triggers, your tendencies. Because when you understand yourself, you can love better and you can lead better. And readiness isn't about time, it's about transformation. When you've done the work, when you've done the self-analysis, when you've changed your behavior, when you've made peace with your past, you don't approach people the same way, right? You approach them with clarity, with intention, with emotional intelligence. You're preparing for it. Love doesn't just need to be found. It needs to be maintained. You don't just become better in love, you become better in how you lead your life. It helps you transform into the version of yourself that's ready for what you've been praying for. And that's the code. If you found this conversation insightful, please share my podcast with your tribe. Be sure to subscribe and comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts on my content, ideas for new episodes, or guests I should have on the show, or just how I made you feel. As always, I wish you much peace, much joy, and many blessings. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Reinvention Code. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who's stepping into their next season. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a conversation. Remember, reinvention isn't random, it has a code. I'll see you next time.